The message came on a quiet Tuesday morning when the sun was just rising over the Atlantic Ocean, deep in space. Far beyond the planet Neptune, a small relay station picked up a signal that would change everything. The signal was strong and clear, and it was meant for Earth. It was meant for all of humanity. Commander Daniel Carter was drinking his morning coffee in the central operations room of Earth's United Defense Command. The room was usually calm at this hour. Most of the night shift had gone home, and the day shift was just arriving. Daniel liked this time because it gave him a few peaceful moments before the busy day began. That peace ended when his communication officer ran through the door. The young man was pale and breathing hard. His hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped the tablet he was carrying. Daniel put down his coffee and stood up. He had never seen anyone look so frightened. The officer held out the tablet without saying a word. Daniel took it and looked at the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The symbols on the display were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were not from any human language. They were not from any code or system that Earth had ever created. They were alien. Daniel immediately contacted Admiral Lisa Monroe. She was the highest-ranking officer in the entire Defense Command. She had spent 30 years of her life preparing humanity for the possibility of meeting other species in the galaxy. She had written books about it. She had trained thousands of officers for it. But nothing could truly prepare anyone for this moment. Admiral Monroe arrived within the hour. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her uniform was perfect as always. But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders and the worry in her eyes. She took the tablet from him and studied the alien symbols for a long time without speaking. The translation teams worked through the entire day and into the night. They used the most powerful computers on Earth. They tried every algorithm and every method they knew. Slowly, piece by piece, the alien message began to make sense. By midnight, they had a complete translation. The message was from something called the Galaxy Council. According to the translation, this was a governing body made up of 47 different spacefaring species. They had existed for over 12,000 years. They controlled thousands of star systems across the galaxy. And they had been watching humanity for a very long time. The Council had seen humans take their first steps on the moon. They had watched as humanity built colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. They had observed human ships traveling to distant star systems. And now they had decided that it was time to make their presence known. But this was not a friendly hello. This was not an invitation to join a peaceful community of civilizations. The message was a demand. It was an order. It was a threat dressed up in formal language. The Galaxy Council had rules for new species. Every civilization that entered galactic society was required to pay tribute. This was simply how things worked. The strong species ruled, and the weak species paid. It had been this way for thousands of years, and the Council saw no reason to change. The list of demands was long and crushing. Earth would surrender 30% of all its rare mineral production to the Council. Human scientists would hand over all their genetic research to Council officials. 3 colony worlds in the Kepler system would be given up immediately and permanently. Human ships would be limited in size and weapons. Human expansion into new star systems would stop at the borders that the Council decided, and at the bottom of the message was a warning. If humanity refused these demands, they would face something called corrective integration. The words sounded almost gentle, but their meaning was clear to everyone who read them. Corrective integration meant war. It meant conquest. It meant the end of human freedom forever. Admiral Monroe read the demands 5 times. Each time her face grew harder and her jaw tighter. She had trained her whole life to protect humanity from dangers. She had imagined wars with other nations and disasters from space. But she had never imagined anything like this. She turned to Daniel and spoke in a voice so quiet that only he could hear. "They are treating us like we have already lost," she said. "They are looking at us like we are animals that do not know they are, about to be put in cages." Daniel felt something growing in his chest as he listened to her words. It was not fear. Fear would have made sense in this moment. Fear would have been the logical response to such overwhelming power. But what Daniel felt was not fear. It was anger. It was a hot and growing fury at the arrogance of these aliens who thought they could simply take whatever they wanted. The Council had given humanity 90 standard days to respond, 90 days to gather their tribute, 90 days to surrender their colonies and their research and their pride, 90 days to accept their place as servants in a galactic order they had never asked to join. The leaders of Earth gathered in Geneva within hours of the translation being completed. Presidents and prime ministers and generals flew in from every corner of the planet. The old arguments between nations suddenly seemed small and foolish. The old borders and conflicts meant nothing now. Every human leader understood that they faced a threat that could destroy them all. President Kevin Walsh stood before them on the second day of meetings. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many hard decisions. He held a printed copy of the Council's demands in his hands. "We have 90 days to decide the future of our species," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "We can accept these demands. We can pay their tribute and surrender our colonies and become part of their system. Many other species have done this. It is the safe path. It is the path that keeps us alive." He paused and looked around the room at every face watching him. "Or we can refuse," he continued. "We can tell the Galaxy Council that humanity does not pay tribute to anyone. We can stand up and say no. This path is dangerous. It might lead to our complete destruction. But it is the path that lets us keep our souls." The debate that followed lasted 3 full days and 3 full nights. Some leaders begged for peace. They talked about the size of the Council's fleets and the power of their weapons. They talked about the millions of innocent people who would die in a war that humanity could not possibly win. They said that survival was more important than pride. Others demanded resistance. They talked about freedom and dignity. They talked about the children who would grow up under alien rule. They talked about what it would mean for humanity to bow down without even trying to fight. Admiral Monroe spoke on the final day. She did not talk about military strategy or odds of victory. She asked one simple question: what kind of species do we want to be? The vote was taken that evening. One by one, every leader made their choice. The room was completely silent as the results were counted. The vote was unanimous. Every single leader had voted the same way. Humanity would not pay tribute. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not kneel. President Walsh sent the response himself. It was just one word, transmitted in every human language and every alien language they had decoded. "No." Admiral Monroe stood beside him as the message traveled out into space. She knew what was coming. She knew the Council would not accept this answer. War was now certain, but when she looked around at her officers, she did not see fear. She saw fire. The countdown had begun. The news of humanity's answer spread across the solar system like wildfire. Every colony heard it. Every space station received the transmission. Every ship in the fleet picked up the message. That single word traveled from Earth to Mars to the moons of Jupiter and beyond. No. Humanity had said no to the most powerful force in the galaxy. The government had prepared for panic. They had written speeches to calm frightened citizens. They had placed security forces on alert in every major city. They expected riots and chaos and people trying to flee to the outer colonies where they might be safe. None of that happened. Instead of panic, there was anger. Instead of fear, there was determination. People who had never thought about fighting suddenly wanted to defend their home. Citizens who had lived peaceful lives suddenly demanded weapons and training. The Council had done something that no human leader had ever managed to do. They had united all of humanity under a single purpose. Dr. Amanda Price was working in her research laboratory on the moon when the news arrived. She was 52 years old and had spent most of her life studying theoretical physics. Her work was about equations and possibilities and ideas that existed only on paper. Most people could not understand what she did. Most people did not even try. 2 days after humanity's answer was sent, military officers arrived at her laboratory. They were serious men and women in crisp uniforms who spoke in short sentences. They showed her detailed reports about Council technology. They showed her estimates of alien weapons that could destroy entire cities from orbit. Then they asked her one question. Could she build a shield to protect Earth? Amanda studied the data they had given her. The math was clear, and the math was brutal. The energy requirements for such a shield were beyond anything humanity had ever produced. The technology simply did not exist. Building such a thing would normally take 50 or 60 years of research and development. She looked up at the officers, told them she would do it in 60 days. She told them it was probably impo. Sabelle, she told them she would need every scientist and every resource they could spare. And she told them she would try anyway. Because trying was all that mattered now. That spirit spread too. Every corner of human space in the weeks that followed, Captain Greg Turner commanded the largest shipyard in the solar system. It floated in orbit above Mars. A massive structure of metal and light where thousands of workers built the ships that carried humanity to the stars. For years, these workers had constructed cargo vessels and exploration craft. They had built machines designed for peace and discovery and the expansion of human knowledge. Now, they would build something very different. The conversion. Orders arrived on the third day after humanity's answer. Greg gathered his workers in the main assembly hall and explained what needed to happen. Cargo ships would become warships. Mining vessels would become missile carriers. Every piece of equipment would be examined for military use. The work began immediately, and it never stopped. Day shifts blended into night shifts. Workers slept in short bursts and ate their meals while standing at their stations. Mining lasers were removed and replaced with weapons designed to cut through armor. Cargo bays were emptied and filled with missiles and ammunition. Engine systems were modified to run beyond their safe limits, because speed might mean the difference between life and death. The ships they built were not pretty. They were blocky and rough and covered with weapons that stuck out at odd angles. Compared to the elegant alien vessels in the intelligence reports, they looked crude and primitive. But they were tough, and they were deadly, and they were human. One of Greg's workers stopped him during a late-night inspection. The man was young and tired and had grease on his face from 12 hours of hard labor. He asked Greg a simple question. Can we actually win this fight? Greg thought about the question for a long moment. Then he gave his honest answer. Winning might not be possible. The Council had thousands of years of experience and millions of ships. But making them pay a terrible price was possible. Making them remember humanity forever was possible. And that would have to be enough. On Earth, recruitment centers opened in every city on every continent. The lines stretched around buildings and down streets for miles. Young people stood next to old people. Rich stood beside poor. Teachers and doctors and construction workers and artists all waited together, their chance to serve. Nicole Perry had been a school teacher for 23 years. She taught history and literature to children in a small town in Ohio. She had never held a weapon in her life. She had never been in any kind of fight. Her days were filled with books and lessons and helping young minds grow. But when she heard what the Council had demanded and what humanity had answered, something changed deep inside her heart. She drove 3 hours to the nearest recruitment center and stood in line for most of the day. When the officer at the desk asked why she wanted to join the military, she had a simple answer ready. Someone has to tell them no, she said. Someone has to stand up. And if I am not willing to stand up, then how can I ask anyone else to do it? The training was the hardest thing Nicole had ever done. She was not young anymore, and her body complained every single day. The drills were exhausting. The weapons were heavy and complicated. The other recruits were often half her age and twice as strong. Many people around her failed or quit or simply could not continue. Nicole refused to quit. Every night when her muscles ached and her lungs burned, she thought about her students. She thought about the future they deserved. She thought about what kind of world they would inherit if humanity simply gave up. Those thoughts kept her going when nothing else could. The Council sent more messages as the deadline approached. Each message was more threatening than the one before. They described fleets that numbered in the millions. They described weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. They described species that had resisted tribute and no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Humanity's response was always the same. That single word sent again and again, no. Admiral Monroe worked 20 hours every day coordinating the defense preparations. Her office was buried under reports and plans and intelligence estimates. Every day brought new problems that seemed impossible to solve. Every night she fell asleep at her desk and dreamed of alien ships filling the sky. But she also saw something that gave her hope. She saw humans working together in ways they never had before. She saw scientists sharing secrets that nations had kept hidden for generations. She saw enemies becoming allies and strangers becoming friends. The Council had wanted to break humanity. Instead, they had forged humanity into something stronger than it had ever been. Commander, Daniel Carter received command of the new flagship on the 75th day. The ship was called Defiance, and it was the largest warship humanity had ever constructed. It bristled with weapons and armor and looked more like a flying fortress than a graceful vessel. Daniel walked through its corridors on his first day aboard. He met the crew members who would serve under him. He checked the weapons systems and the engines and the shields. Everything was as ready as it could be. His executive officer found him on the observation deck that night, staring out at the stars. She asked him the question that everyone was asking. Did he think they could win? Daniel watched the distant lights for a long time before answering. He said he did not know if victory was possible, but he knew that humanity would make the Council remember this fight forever. He knew that they would give everything they had, and sometimes that was more important than winning. The fleet gathered around Earth as the final days counted down. 300 ships against an empire of thousands of worlds. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough, but it was what they had, and they were ready to use it. The Council fleet arrived on the 91st day. They came out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of the solar system, peering in normal space like ghosts materializing from nothing. One moment the sensors showed empty void. The next moment, they showed over 2,000 alien warships. Admiral Lisa Monroe stood in her command center orbiting Earth and watched the tactical displays light up with enemy contacts. Each red dot represented a vessel larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. The lead ship alone was bigger than some of Earth's moons. It hung in space like a metal mountain, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The command center was silent. Every officer stared at their screens with wide eyes. They had known the Council would come. They had prepared for this moment for 90 days. But seeing the reality of that massive fleet was something else entirely. Numbers on a report were one thing. Actual ships ready to destroy everything you loved were another. Monroe kept her voice calm and steady when she spoke. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. All stations report status, she said. The responses came back one by one. Weapons ready. Shields ready. Fleet standing by. Earth's defenses were as prepared as they would ever be. A communication officer spoke up from across the room. Admiral, they are hailing us. Monroe straightened her uniform and nodded. Put them through. The main screen flickered and then showed an alien face. The being was vaguely humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Its skin was pale blue like a winter sky. Its eyes were completely black, with no white showing at all. It wore some kind of elaborate clothing that might have been a uniform or might have been ceremonial dress. When it spoke, translation system rendered its words in perfect English. I am High Arbiter Thiessen of the Galaxy Council, the alien said. Its voice was cold and flat, like someone reading from a script they had read many times before. Your defiance has been noted and recorded. You have been given the opportunity to submit your tribute and accept integration peacefully. You have refused this generous offer. You now have one final chance. Surrender now, and your punishment will be reduced. Continue your foolish resistance, and your entire species will serve as an example to others. Monroe looked at the alien face on her screen. She thought about all the people on Earth below her. She thought about the colonies scattered across human space. She thought about the soldiers and scientists and ordinary citizens who had worked so hard to prepare for this moment. This is Admiral Lisa Monroe. She replied, I speak for the United Earth Government and for all of humanity. We received your demands 90 days ago. We considered them very carefully, and we decided that we would rather die as free people then live as your servants. Our answer has not changed. Our answer will never change. The answer is no. There was a long pause. The alien's black eyes seemed to study her through the screen. When it spoke again, there was something different in its voice. Perhaps it was surprise. Perhaps it was anger. Perhaps it was simply confusion at meeting a species that would not submit. Then you have chosen extinction, Thiessen said. The screen went dark. The first wave of council ships began moving toward the inner solar system immediately. Their formation was spread wide across millions of kilometers. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met prey that could fight back. Their speed was casual, almost lazy. They were in no hurry. They had done this many times before. They did not expect what waited for them at Neptune. Captain Greg Turner had been hiding his ambush fleet in the shadow of the gas giant for 3 days. 50 ships running completely silent with all systems powered down to minimum. The crews had lived in darkness and cold, eating emergency rations and speaking in whispers, even though no one could possibly hear them. When the Council advance force passed within weapons range, Greg gave the order to attack. The human ships came out of hiding like wolves emerging from a forest. Their engines roared to full power. Their weapon systems came online, and they launched everything they had at the unsuspecting enemy the Council had abandoned. Nuclear weapons thousands of years ago, they considered such technology primitive and inefficient. Their shields were designed to deflect energy beams and plasma bolts and the advanced weapons of civilized species. They were not designed for the raw, brutal force of nuclear explosions. The first warheads detonated against Council shields in blinding flashes of light and radiation. The shields flickered and failed under the assault. 3 Council ships were destroyed in the first seconds of the battle, torn apart by forces they had not prepared for. 4 more were crippled, their systems overloaded and their crews dead or dying. The Council fleet stopped its advance. Confusion spread through their communications like a disease. This was not supposed to happen. Primitive species did not fight back. Primitive species certainly did not destroy Council warships on the first engagement. On Earth, crowds had gathered around public display screens in every city. They watched the battle unfold in real time, transmitted from sensors across the solar system. When the first Council ships exploded, a sound rose up from those crowds. It was cheering. It was crying. It was the sound of hope being born in the hearts of people who had expected only death. Admiral Monroe allowed herself a small smile as she watched the tactical display. The ambush had worked better than she had dared to hope, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Council had lost 7 ships. They still had nearly 2,000 more. The real battle was just starting. High Arbiter Thiessen stared at the reports coming in from the Neptune engagement. He had commanded Council fleets for over 200 years. He had overseen the integration of 37 species. He had never lost a single ship to primitive resistance. Now, he had lost 7 in the first hour. He gave new orders to his fleet commanders. No more casual advances. No more spread formations. The humans had shown they could fight. Now the Council would show them what real power looked like. The main Council fleet reformed into a tight battle formation and began moving toward Earth at full speed. Their weapons charged to maximum. Their shields reinforced with every bit of energy they could spare. They would not be surprised again. Commander Daniel Carter watched them coming from the bridge of the Defiance. His ship was positioned at the front of humanity's defensive line, ready to meet the enemy head-on. Around him, 300 human vessels waited for orders. They were outnumbered almost 7-1. Their technology was centuries behind their enemy. By every logical measure, they had already lost. But logic did not account for the fire that burned in human hearts. Daniel opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice reached every ship, every crew member, every soul who had chosen to stand against the Council. "They are coming," he said. "They think we are weak. They think we will break. They think this will be easy. Today, we show them how wrong they are. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is made of. Whatever happens next, know that I am proud to fight beside you. Now let us give them a battle they will never forget." The Council fleet entered weapons range. The sky filled with fire, and humanity refused to run. The battle for the solar system was the most violent event in human history. Ships exploded like fireworks across the darkness of space. Weapons fire painted the void in colors that had no names. The screams of dying crews were cut short as their vessels were torn apart by forces beyond imagination. The initial victories at Neptune had given humanity hope. But hope alone could not defeat an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. The Council adapted quickly. They learned from their losses. They changed their tactics. And they kept coming. Human ships fell by the dozens in those first terrible weeks. Each loss was felt across all of human space. These were not just machines being destroyed. These were sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, friends and lovers. Every explosion meant families who would never be whole again. But for every human ship that died, took Council vessels with it. Captains rammed their crippled ships into enemy formations. Crews refused to surrender even when their situation was hopeless. Wounded soldiers kept fighting until their last breath left their bodies. The Council had never seen anything like it. By the end of the first month, the outer colonies had fallen. There was simply no way to defend them against such overwhelming force. The order came to evacuate everyone who could be moved. Millions of refugees fled toward the inner solar system, carrying only what they could fit in small bags and leaving behind everything they had built. Nicole Perry was stationed on a frigate, called the Spirit of Ohio, during the evacuation of the Kepler colonies. Her ship provided cover fire while transport vessels loaded desperate civilians. Council warships filled the sky around them, pressing closer with every passing minute. The battle was chaos. Nicole worked the weapons console with hands that never stopped shaking. She watched friends die on screens that showed their ships breaking apart. She heard their final transmissions cut off in mid-sentence. And she kept firing because stopping meant letting the transports be destroyed. Her ship took a direct hit during the final phase of the evacuation. The blast tore through 3 decks and killed half the crew instantly. Fires broke out in the engine room. The hull began to crack. The captain gave the order to abandon ship, but Nicole and a handful of survivors refused to leave. The weapon systems were still working. The transports were still loading civilians. Every second they could keep fighting meant more people escaping to safety. They sealed the damaged sections and rerouted power to the guns. They worked in suits because the air was leaking out. They fired until their ammunition ran dry, and then they fired the emergency systems that should never be used as weapons. They fought until rescue ships finally arrived to pull them out. A Council prisoner was brought aboard the rescue vessel. He was a junior officer whose ship had been destroyed in the fighting. He looked at Nicole with genuine confusion in his alien eyes. "Why do you keep fighting?" he asked her. "Your defeat is mathematically certain. Every calculation shows that you cannot win. Continuing to resist only increases your suffering." Nicole was exhausted. Her body hurt in places she did not know could hurt. She had watched people she cared about die. She had come closer to death than she ever wanted to come again. But she still found the energy to answer his question. "Because we are human," she said. "We do not make decisions based on mathematics. We are angry." The Council officer had no response to that. The war ground on through the second month and into the third. Humanity lost battle after battle. The defensive lines fell back again and again. The Council advanced steadily toward Earth, paying a price in ships and crews that grew higher with each engagement. Dr. Amanda Price worked without rest in her laboratory on the moon. The Planetary Shield Project had become her entire existence. She slept only when her body refused to function anymore. She ate only when someone forced food into her hands. Her team was in the same condition, driven by the knowledge that billions of lives depended on their success. The technology should not have worked. Every scientific principle said it was impossible. The energy requirements were too high. The field generators were too unstable. 100 things could go wrong, and only one thing could go right. But Amanda had stopped believing in impossible. She had seen human soldiers hold positions that could not be held. She had seen engineers build weapons that could not be built. She had seen ordinary people become heroes through nothing but determination and refusal to quit. If they could do the impossible, so could she. The shield generator was completed on the 90th day of the war. It was ugly and dangerous, and consumed more power than all of Earth's cities combined. Amanda was not even sure it would work until she activated it. Admiral Monroe contacted her on the morning of the 100th day. The Council fleet was entering Earth's orbit. Over 800 enemy vessels surrounded the planet, their weapons charged and ready to begin the bombardment that would end human civilization forever. "Is it ready?" Monroe asked. Amanda looked at her creation. It hummed with barely contained energy. Warning lights blinked across every console. The readings showed stress levels that were far beyond safe limits. "It is ready," she said. Monroe gave the order. The shield flickered to life around Earth in a wave of golden light that spread from pole to pole. It was beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare even in the middle of a war. The barrier shimmered like water touched by sunlight. The Council opened fire. Beams of energy that could vaporize mountains struck the shield and scattered into harmless light. Missiles that could crack continents exploded against the barrier without leaving a scratch. The full fury of the Council fleet was unleashed against Earth, and Earth did not fall. High Arbiter Thiessen watched from his command ship as attack after attack failed. The primitive species had done something his own scientists said was impossible. They had built a planetary shield with technology that should have been centuries beyond their capability, for the first time since the war began. Thiessen felt something unfamiliar crawling up his spine. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion because he had not felt it in over 100 years. It was doubt on Earth. People emerged from shelters and looked up at the sky. The shield turned the Council's killing light into aurora, displays that painted the heavens in colors of red and green and gold. Children pointed and laughed at the pretty lights, not understanding that each flash was an attack that would have killed millions. Humanity had survived another day, and in war, sometimes that was enough. The siege of Earth lasted 6 months. The Council threw everything they had at the planetary shield, searching for weaknesses that did not exist. They tried concentrated fire from 1,000 ships at once. They tried exotic weapons that had destroyed other civilizations. They tried waiting for the shield to fail on its own. Nothing worked, Dr. Amanda. Price and her team improved the shield technology every single day. Each attack taught them something new. Each failed assault gave them data they used to make the barrier stronger. The Council was fighting an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. Meanwhile, human resistance spread across the occupied colonies like a fire that could not be contained. The Council had expected submission after military defeat. They had conquered hundreds of species, and all of them had eventually accepted their fate. Humans were supposed to be no different. They were very different. Chris Bennett had been a farmer on the colony world of Konzo arrived. He had grown crops and raised animals and lived a simple, peaceful life. When the occupation began, he was expected to continue farming and give most of his harvest to the new rulers. Instead, he became a resistance leader. His group started small, just a few friends who refused to accept alien masters. They hid in the mountains and planned raids on Council's supply lines. They sabotaged equipment and freed prisoners and made life difficult for the occupiers in every way they could imagine. The Council sent soldiers to hunt them. Chris lost people he cared about. The odds against them were impossible. But they kept fighting because fighting was all they had left. "We just need to hold on," Chris told his people during the darkest nights. "Earth is still free. As long as Earth stands, we have hope." That hope sustained resistance movements across every occupied world. Humans refused to be conquered even when they were surrounded by enemies. They fought with weapons when they had them and with bare hands when they did not. They made the Council pay for every inch of ground in blood. The turning point came in the 7th month of the war. 3 Council member species announced they were withdrawing from the coalition. They had joined the campaign expecting easy tribute from a primitive newcomer. They had expected a quick victory and a share of the spoils. Instead, they had lost hundreds of ships and thousands of soldiers fighting an enemy that simply would not stop. The cost was too high. The war was taking too long. Other matters needed their attention. More withdrawals followed. Species that had been loyal council members for thousands of years began questioning whether this fight was worth continuing. The coalition that had seemed unbreakable began to crack. High Arbiter Thiessen watched his alliance crumble and felt the doubt that had started at Earth grow into something worse. He had been so certain of victory. He had been so confident that humans would break like every other species. He had been wrong. He requested a meeting with human leadership. Admiral Lisa Monroe traveled to a neutral station constructed specifically for the occasion. She brought no weapons and only a small escort. The station floated in empty space between the two fleets, a tiny bubble of peace in the middle of war. Thiessen was waiting for her in the main conference room. He looked different than he had in their first communication. The arrogance was gone from his posture. The cold certainty had faded from his black eyes. He looked tired in a way that Monroe understood very well. "We will withdraw," he said, without any greeting or ceremony. "Your species will be left alone. You will not be asked to pay tribute or accept integration." Monroe kept her face neutral, even though her heart was racing. "What about our colonies? They will be returned to your control. Our forces will leave within 30 standard days and guarantees against future aggression." Thiessen's black eyes studied her for a long moment. "You have made your point, Admiral. The Galaxy Council has existed for 12,000 years. We have integrated hundreds of species. In all that time, no one has ever refused our demands and survived to tell about it. You have broken something that cannot be easily repaired. Other species will hear about this. They will wonder if they too could say no." "Good," Monroe replied. "Maybe your next first contact will start with a handshake instead of a demand." The Council fleet began withdrawing from human space 3 days later. The celebrations that followed lasted for weeks. People danced in the streets of every city on Earth. They cheered on every colony that had held out against occupation. They wept for the dead and embraced the living. Commander Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck of the Defiance and watched the enemy ships disappear into faster-than-light transit. He had lost many friends in this war. He had seen horrors that would haunt his dreams forever. But they had one. Against all odds and all logic, they had one. Nicole Perry returned to her hometown in Ohio after the war ended. The school where she had taught was still standing. The children she had worried about were still alive. She went back to teaching history and literature, but now she had new stories to tell. True stories about ordinary people who refused to give up. Dr. Amanda Price received every honor humanity could give her. She did not care about medals or titles. She cared about the fact that her work had saved billions of lives. That was enough. Chris Bennett and the other resistance fighters emerged from their hiding places on Haven. The occupation was over. The Council soldiers were gone. The fields he had once farmed were damaged, but not destroyed. He began planting new crops the very next day. President Kevin Walsh addressed all of humanity on the anniversary of First Contact. His face appeared on screens across the solar system and beyond. He spoke simply and honestly about what they had accomplished together. "They thought we would kneel," he said. "They thought fear would be enough to break us. They were wrong. And if anyone else in this vast galaxy thinks they can demand tribute from humanity, let them come. Let them learn what we taught the Council." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "We do not kneel. We do not break. And we do not pay tribute to anyone." In the years that followed, humanity expanded across the stars with new confidence. They met other species, some friendly and some hostile. But the lesson of the tribute war was never forgotten. The galaxy had learned what humans were capable of when pushed too far. They had seen a young species stand against an ancient empire and refuse to fall. They had watched the impossible become possible through nothing but determination and courage. Other species began to whisper about the humans. They told stories about the warriors who would not surrender, and the scientists who built miracles, and the ordinary people who became heroes. They warned each other never to threaten humanity unless they were prepared to pay a terrible price. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the Galaxy Council remembered their greatest failure. They remembered the primitive species that had looked at their demands and their fleets in their 12,000 years of power, said one simple word. No. That word echoed through history forever.